What we're going to do today is we're going to go over the first 24 picks in this year's fantasy football draft. Are you ready to get started?
Absolutely. This is going to be for standard leagues. Obviously, we'll mention it. We'll mention, if there's any PPR implications, but basically top 24 for standard.
All right, let's get started. Those fantasy GOODFELLAS.
Boom, boom, boom. Rolling on the field.
For the first pick in this year's NFL fantasy football draft, the number one pick is
Christian McCaffrey. After not missing any games in his first 3 seasons, he missed 13 last year. If he stays healthy for 16 games, he'll surpass 1,000 yards receiving. Despite the injury, last year's injury, I think he's the number one guy.
For the second pick in this year's draft, you suggest
Dalvin Cook, another guy that's shifty, explosive. Unfortunately, though, Dalvin Cook, he's a good pass catcher, but he is not Christian McCaffrey. So for that reason, I have him at 2. Some people would feel comfortable taking Dalvin Cook number 1. Yeah, that's reasonable, but I got Dalvin Cook as number 2.
And for the third pick in this year's fantasy football draft, you suggest
Derrick Henry. He surpassed 2,000 yards last year, rushing. The guy's a beast. The guy will get handouts at Tennessee. That is a run-first team. I don't care if they got Julio Jones. This team runs first. Now, the only thing is, obviously, Derrick Henry doesn't catch that many passes. And the thing is, his workload. We have 681 carries the last 2 seasons. There is definitely an injury chance, but Derrick Henry is number 3.
For the fourth pick in this year's NFL fantasy football draft, you suggest
Alvin Kamara. Kamara was a little undervalued last year, and he did nothing but produce regardless of quarterback. A guy that's going to get a lot of yards receiving and rushing. Kamara is my number 4.
So for the fifth pick in this year's NFL fantasy football draft, you suggest
Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor last year was the 4th best running back in most scoring format. He is strong. He's fast. I mean, we saw him in the combine. I was high on him in the preseason last year, but he didn't really produce until the second half when Frank Reich finally freed him. We hope he gets a lot of usage.
For the sixth pick in this year's NFL football draft, you suggest picking
Nick Chubb. Chubb is a stud, maybe the best pure rusher. The concern is with Cleveland, Kareem Hunt that you have to deal with, right? My other concern is Baker Mayfield. I am not high on him. He's not the guy, and that could affect Chubb.
For the seventh pick in this year's NFL football draft, you suggest
Aaron Jones. And Aaron Jones is climbing steadily. I had dropped him into the second round because we didn't think we didn't think he was going to return as a Packer. But now it looks like he's going to return, which bodes well for Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones is very shifty, that can score every time he touches the ball.
So for the eighth pick in this year's NFL fantasy football draft, you suggest
Saquon Barkley. Now, Saquon is a guy when fully healthy, could be the number 1 overall pick. He does it all, right? He's a great pass catcher, great rusher, good instincts, power, speed. Barkley has everything. The problem is he is returning from an ACL injury. He might not even start the season. There are a lot of question marks. How long is it going to take for him to warm up? And then the biggest issue of them all, Daniel Jones. That offense with the Giants might not be that good.
For the ninth pick in this year's NFL fantasy football draft, you suggest
Devonta Adams. Now, here's the guy that would have taken a precipitous fall if Aaron Rodgers wasn't his quarterback. I mean, I would have completely stayed away from him. He would have dropped substantially with Love as his quarterback. Aaron Rodgers looks like he's coming back. So Devonta Adams is my number 1 receiver. Saw last year, he had everything. He had the receptions, he had the yardage, he had the touchdowns. And I don't see why that wouldn't happen again.
For the 10th pick in this year's NFL fantasy football draft, you suggest
Tyreek Hill. He's our second receiver. Devonta Adams caught more passes, had more yardage, and that's probably going to be the case again this year. But Tyreek Hill is in that amazing offense, so he's going to score a lot of touchdowns. For that reason, and Hill's going to score a lot of touchdowns and a lot of long touchdowns. For that reason, he's our number 10 player.
For the 11th pick in this year's NFL fantasy football draft, you suggest
Ezekiel Elliott. So Elliott is dropping a bit. We know that Dallas is going to want to give him the ball, so he's going to get touches. But last year, granted, he had crap at the quarterback position last year to support him after Prescott went down. but he just didn't look himself. I don't know. Was he playing hurt? Is he unmotivated? Is he lazy at this point? There are a lot of question marks, and everybody thinks, oh, Dak is back. Everything's going to be fixed. I have my doubts. That's why I'm putting him down to number 11.
4. Most typically here, the last pick in this year's NFL fantasy football draft in a 12-team league, coming in at number 12 is
Travis Kelce. Not only is Kelce a tight end, right, which is a position that a lot of teams get very little production from, other than those that have maybe like the top 4 or 5 tight ends. Everybody else is not going to get any production from this position. And here you have a guy, Kelce, who maybe some people may argue is Patrick Mahomes' favorite target. So you have a guy that's going to get passes, going to get yardage, going to get TDs from the tight end position. So that's why I have him at 12. He is in his early 30s, though. So at some point, you know, you as a receiver, when you start hitting that 32, 33, 34 mark, you hit a wall. So that's another concern with Kelce. That's why I have him at 12. But he did have his best season last year.
With the 13th pick in this year's NFL fantasy football draft, you suggest
Stefon Diggs. Here's the guy I wasn't big on last season. I didn't know what to expect. He just went on to catch for the most yards in the NFL last year, which was 1,535. So he led the league in receiving. And let me tell you, I believe Josh Allen is a great quarterback. Last year, he looked phenomenal.
All right, with the 14th pick in this year's NFL fantasy football draft, you suggest?
Here's the risk pick, right? Najee Harris. He's going to be in a good situation in Pittsburgh. If he gets the usage, he could put up great numbers, right? He could be a top 5 back.
With the 15th pick in this year's NFL fantasy football draft, you suggest?
Austin Ekeler. He's a sleeper. He's not a big name. In PPR leagues, should be drafted probably at the end of the first round.
With the 16th pick in this year's NFL fantasy football draft, you suggest?
Joe Mixon. Here's a guy, he's been hurt a lot. Joe Mixon can easily catch. He's going to catch a lot of passes, so he can easily, rush for 1,000, catch for 500. He can be one of those guys, easily a top 10 back, but there are risks. Again, and that's why he's 16, and it's Cincinnati. Giovanni Bernard is not there anymore. So Mixon could be a super bell cow.
With the 17th pick in this year's NFL fantasy football draft, you suggest?
Calvin Ridley. You got to look at his numbers from last year, right? He had 1,374 receiving yards, 9 touchdowns. A little underrated too. A lot of people they think of Julio Jones when they think Atlanta receivers. You still have Matt Ryan there. Yes, he's on the decline, but Ridley's going to be his go-to guy. I like Ridley at 17.
And with the 18th pick in this year's NFL fantasy football draft, you suggest?
Antonio Gibson. Now, Antonio Gibson's another guy, right? He's a little bit of a surprise. Didn't touch the ball much when he played in college at Memphis. And then he came out of nowhere with the Redskins last year and was very, very productive.
And with the 19th pick in this year's NFL fantasy football draft, you suggest?
DeAndre Hopkins. This guy is super consistent, right? He might not be as sexy as, some of the other guys, but he is just a guy that gets open, catches balls.
With the 20th pick in this year's NFL fantasy football draft, you suggest?
Justin Jefferson. He had 1,407 receiving yards last year, which was 4th in the league. Now, how far can Kirk Cousins take him?
And with the 21st pick in this year's NFL fantasy football draft, you suggest?
DK Metcalf. Now we're talking sexy. And when Russell Wilson is throwing the ball like a maniac, like he did last year, Metcalf is brilliant. But this year, Pete Carroll wants to be committed to the run. Russell Wilson may not pass as much. Hence, DK Metcalf's value takes a hit.
And with the 22nd pick in this year's NFL fantasy football draft, you suggest?
Patrick Mahomes. Now, I'm normally not an advocate for drafting quarterbacks early, but I think in most leagues, quarterbacks are drafted early. I bet you Patrick Mahomes will be drafted before the 22nd pick in most drafts. So we have him at 22.
And with the 23rd pick in this year's NFL fantasy football draft, you suggest?
Clyde EdwardsHelaire. This could end up being a bargain if he actually produces what people expected from him last year, right? He's the number 1 back for Kansas City Chiefs, the most explosive offense in the league. Kansas City's going to score a lot of touchdowns. Maybe he gets more vulture touchdowns. Maybe he catches more passes out of the backfield. Maybe Edwards-Helaire produces what, like he was supposed to last year.
And with the 24th pick in this year's NFL Fantasy Football Draft, you suggest?
AJ Brown. I mean, the guy is a stud. Big, he's fast. He does it all. What holds him back is Ryan Tannehill. Now you add Julio Jones, who's also going to get some targets. And, some people might say, hey, that might free him up more because now Julio Jones is going to take some corners. But I think everything together, AJ Brown's going to do well. He's still not going to be an elite receiver because of his circumstances. But I like him at the end of the second round, beginning of the third round.
I'm excited to get started. I haven't done any research lately, so I'm going to use a lot of the information you said to kind of go over this.
Yeah, I'm hoping this, gets the blood pumping, juices flowing here for fantasy owners. Hopefully they watch our video and just start thinking about this. I'm going to start putting a list, maybe a 26 to 48. It gets more complicated, but people got to start thinking because the drafts, we're about less than a month away from most drafts.
I'm excited for the next video. And if you are watching this video and you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Thanks, Richard, for coming on here and sharing your top 24.
My pleasure.